This is Metabolic Radio, the podcast dedicated to keeping you informed when it comes to everything fitness. My name is Taylor Empey, and with the help of my co-host Shane Pace, we aim to expose the truths about the health and fitness industry. The information and suggestions given in this podcast should not be considered as clinical or medical advice. Consult with a physician before implementing any information provided on this podcast. And we're back on Metabolic Radio, the podcast that is dedicated to inspiring and educating.
Nice.
New slogan. Just
nice.
kidding.
And you know what I gotta say?
We're going to keep the original.
I just noticed Superman flew in.
That's true.
Yep. Sweet.
It was like
it was
like him and the Flash simultaneously.
Yes, either or both.
Mm-hmm.
Sweet. Beautiful. Beautiful.
Are you going to put your phone down?
No, I'm actually not. As a matter of fact, I've got to think. What do I going to pull?
You realize you're talking in an accent.
Yeah, I know. I did on purpose. Okay. Anyway, yeah, I was looking up something to send you, considering what we are going to talk about, since I actually have my head of it this time.
What are we going to talk about today?
Something. I haven't.
That was my cue to let you know that you could finally introduce the topic instead of me.
I don't want to. Even though I know I'm going to let you do it. Okay. So take that.
So the topic for today is the causes and information surrounding obesity.
Which I think is sweet because I wanted to discuss it.
Yeah, well, you pressed for this,
I
so
did.
you get to lead this one.
No.
Yeah.
No.
I have no idea what you want to talk about on this subject.
It's a big subject.
I can go down my
is
scientific route if you want.
Quite large. Sure.
My list route.
Sure. I want to send you pictures, and I've got to find them.
Oh, okay. All right. Well, so people, obesity. Okay. Pretty much, when you look at what the causes are, and when people talk about obesity, they're going to bring up a variety of different topics. But when it comes down to it, our argument, and Shane and I may even disagree in some aspects,
which we're
when we get into
to.
this conversation.
Yeah,
so we'll just see. But it's from my perspective, you've got obviously something that is, in my opinion, dysfunctional going on in the metabolism.
Mm-hmm.
It's most of obesity is attributed to metabolic syndrome, which your metabolism is basically all the chemical reactions that take place in the body, and especially related to conversion and usage of energy. And when you have metabolic issues or dysfunctions taking place, you end up developing chronic disorders, things like cancer, type 2 diabetes.
Well, diabetes overall.
Yeah, like there's a lot of different things that are chronic disorders or diseases that are linked to metabolic syndrome that are, and one thing that I want to bring up too with this is that, and some people might argue me on this, is that many, if not all, metabolic related diseases are preventable. I actually just wrote a research paper on what?
Should I send this picture to your phone, or do you?
No, I'm not. I don't use my phone on this, man.
Oh, okay. I was just wondering how I should send this so you can see it.
Well, I guess you can do that.
Or
you could just show me yours.
Well, that's a lot of work.
But
what did you call me? Anyway, keep going.
No, I just got done finishing, like I said, a paper on how metabolic syndrome is, well, cancer, one, is a metabolic disease moreover than a genetic disease. And if you look back at the research,
gosh, we may have to talk on cancers too, because that's
Otto Warburg, I think was his name, or Warburger.
Okay.
Warburg. Anyway, him and previous researchers were approaching cancer research from the standpoint of it being a metabolic disease more than genetic. Now, obviously, there's a genetic component for sure, and there's a lot of research that's looked into that. But when there's more modern research coming out, just in the last 3, 5, 10 years, showing that when you approach cancer treatment from the standpoint of it being a metabolic disease, it's actually a lot easier to understand and treat. There's a lot of things that contribute to higher pronality of cancer in individuals that are metabolically related. Things like BMI, things like inflammation.
Right.
Just the fact that...
See, and I think inflammation plays a big part of it anyway.
It does.
For sure. I think anybody who's actually looked at the data, there's no way it's not tightly affiliated.
Yeah.
For different, for obvious reasons, but I think there's, like I said, some of the reasons I want to bring up, I think is affiliated with that. So,
So when it comes to obesity, it's tied right in there with this. Is you have these chronic metabolic dysfunctional changes or reactions that take place in the body over a long period of time that end up contributing to obesity. Causes of obesity that are linked are things like insulin resistance. Obviously, genetic components are part of it, but when you look at the genetic aspect, a lot of people say I'm big boned, or that runs in my family, or there's nothing I can do about it because it's genetic. Well, research will show it's harder to argue that genetics plays more than about a 25 to 50% role in determining in determining things like obesity. Look.
Well, okay.
I know that's a wider range.
No. I'm not going to deny that. So what I was going to say though is, I think that some of the things we talked about with body typing, okay, corresponds to this because of the nature of how the body reacts.
Absolutely.
So even though statistically it may not show it, it actually does play a bigger part than that. That being said, it's not an excuse. So
for sure.
Right. And I think okay, so I guess I will kind of start taking lead now, but
go for it.
The majority of what you hear, and I'm not going to say professed experts, I'm going to say experts in the field of fitness and health related things. They'll talk about like we talked about many times before, and this we've kind of run a little bit into the ground, but it is affiliated with this, is calories in and calories out.
Thermodynamics.
That idea, right? Mm-hmm. And the reality in my eyes is, though that does have a play, I think that has a bigger play with someone who has a healthy metabolism than it does with someone who has a non-healthy metabolism. And I think the majority of the problem with people who have weight-related issues, it ties into things like we talked about outside of this and in other episodes, hormones. I think hormones is the biggest player in this. I think, and this is the reason why when I was bringing this up and we were talking government stuff, I wanted the government in the United States to be brought up because of the fact of how it's tied into this. Because I think that what has happened on a nutritional level in the United States has affected a world, a full world demographic. I think it has affected the world because of the nature of
You're saying the nutritional guidelines that are propagated from government,
yes,
are contributing to obesity.
Absolutely.
Okay.
Let's
break that down. What aspects?
Well, and in fairness, I'm not saying I blame them. I'm saying that what they put out there has caused a change in vision, which has caused people to go down the road that is perpetually pushed that direction.
So which specific aspects? So people can kind of get a better idea, rather than just saying the nutritional education that's out there is wrong.
Well, just like I said, they pushed away from fats. They pushed towards sugars. Did
they push towards sugars, or did they push towards carbohydrates? And I get it, right? That ultimately all turns into glucose, but there's a big difference when you eat a complex carbohydrate diet versus simple sugar diet.
Yes, but when you're talking complex to simple, the biggest difference, as we both know, is fiber reactions and the fact that it breaks down slower.
Fiber impacts it, but when you have these
chains,
the longer the chain, right, the more complex. So just the molecular structure of it takes much longer to absorb, regardless of the fiber.
Which is true.
I mean, though the fiber does play a role.
Which is true, and I'm not denying that. But I'm saying, what do they push towards? They push towards things that were tied more loosely to not complex but simple carbohydrates. Wow, my tongue's tying.
Because if you look at even the old school, it's not that old school, but the food pyramid and now the My Plate, they still push things like Now, fruits, vegetables, which we know the fruit does have sugar, but it has the fiber tied in, and then you got your starch, your tuber type, potatoes, root based carbohydrates,
for sure.
Some grains. Obviously, we know there's breads that are bad, but things like beans. I'm sorry, legumes. But then under the grains category, like the rices and oats, things like that, which are complex carbohydrates that aren't sugars,
depending on how processed they are. That's true.
But that's the thing, because then you're talking about another processed food. It doesn't necessarily say. I mean, okay, so like if we're looking food pyramid or my plate, right? Like a cereal could be like one of your grains servings,
Absolutely.
but they still are pushing whole foods in that. It's just,
well, that's true. I'll give you that.
And I'm playing devil's advocate here because I disagree somewhat with those kind of quote unquote standards. On more minute detailed levels, right. But I'm not. What I'm getting at is that I'm trying to get you to explain what the exact things are that are contributing to obesity that you think come from these recommendations.
Well, and this is going to tie into something that we probably need to have a different discussion on, but we're going to talk about in this because it's correlating, is diabetes. So when you start talking a diabetic's viewpoint on how food reacts to their bodies, carbohydrates destroy them. It doesn't just kill them like ultimately. I guess type 1 it could because of the sugar levels if they didn't have insulin shots. But in reality, I mean that's the concept. And I think the swing, and I haven't pulled these pictures up, I should have, because this is something else I wanted to put out there. But the trending of how it's gone up since that food pyramid's been pushed, even though as time's gone on, it climbed dramatically, and then in more recent history, it's starting to slope off because they're changing their viewpoints.
Yeah, type 2 diabetes is actually starting to plateau. Obesity is still increasing, to my understanding.
It's not as dramatic though. And okay, so let me show you.
It's slowing.
I'll do this on a world view, and then I'll let you describe it. So this right here is it's not the whole world, but it gives a few countries. Me moving around. You see what I'm saying? And
yeah,
look at the years and look how it spikes. And you can define it out like
1970. So if we're looking at the US numbers, you're seeing a shift towards an uptrend, a significant uptrend after the late 1970s. Another big shift right at the turn of the century, and then just in recent years it's actually been going towards a downtrend.
Yeah, and if you notice though, it's not just specifically the United States.
Actually, there's very large. In fact, in lesser developed countries, it's showing it's just showing almost a borderline straight up uptrend.
So what's happened to cause that?
But that's not necessarily the government food recommendations. That's westernization of nutritional habits around the world.
Right, I'm not denying that. So
fast food
but
chains.
It corresponds to this though, and this is why I say it goes in conjunction with a viewpoint that was perpetuated by the United States. Okay, like I said, we've talked about Ansel Keys and all his information many times on this, and the fact that his skewed version of his study put an illusion out there that fats were bad. Well, that's been proven more or less heavily, actually, more recently. That's completely false. The government, as you've talked about.
Well, you want to
before,
know like I mentioned that paper, a ketogenic diet is one of the most impacting natural treatments for cancer reduction, cancer cell reduction, and just overall treatment. And it makes chemotherapy and radiation treatments far more effective.
Yeah, substantially more effective.
And which is why that's an argument that cancer could be very much so a metabolic disease, because it's impacted by something such as a simple diet change.
No, for sure. And like I said, I kind of want to take that because I think that's a whole topic.
I'm just saying
talk about
it's kind of
it corresponds. No, it corresponds for sure, because I think there's a lot to tie the metabolism against any disease. And do I place obesity as a disease? I don't. It's a different beast, and it's something that anybody could experience.
You think it's
overall.
like an outcome as a result of
absolutely
chronic conditions?
Yes. Well, it's tied to them. It's tied to chronic conditions.
Yeah.
And so, but like I said, the thing is for me is when you look at how the trend goes up, the 1970s is when it was truly pushed in the United States. Okay, like I said, I was a kid in the 1970s, and I watched how it got pushed out there, and I watched how it kind of made the industries change, and it made the populaces look at how they ate change quite a bit. You know, I was someone who grew up where we used lard and things like that as a kid. You know, we'd save grease off bacon. We do all that kind of stuff.
Dairy was probably pushed pretty heavily.
Dairy was
to
still
that.
pretty used, yeah. Yep.
Which it still is somewhat has a place,
depends on
but
who
it's
you
not.
talk
I wouldn't
to.
say it's pushed.
Right. It depends.
Except, well, during the Got Milk series,
Hugely.
you know what I mean?
Hugely.
I remember growing up with those.
For sure.
Because I'm young.
Well, young's perspective. But anyhow, my point is, it trended with that. So as the idea went out to the world, which included westernization of these other countries, that's what I'm talking about. How it affected, bluntly, the world levels obesities. The trends have gone up dramatically as they've gone more towards what the United States trends.
But one thing to think about is the fat content in fast food, because in my opinion, one of the largest contributors to obesity worldwide, not just in the U.S., is not necessarily just saying, "Hey, go more towards carbs than fats." It's these companies that have grown to be international chains where you've got them on every corner, sometimes even in international countries. And a lot of these foods, though there's a lot that's loaded with sugar, things like that, there's still quite a lot of fat found in fast food.
Oh yeah. But you have yet to watch that show that I recommended to you.
Fathead?
Yeah,
I have not.
I am certain of that. Because you would not be going down this road if you'd watch that show.
Give me a synopsis so I can understand your perspective.
Okay, so Fathead is a show that's put together by, oh gosh dang it, I wish I knew his name off the top of my head. By a comedian. He was a comedian. He did some stuff related to journalism, and he watched Super Size Me and was very bothered by the poor science that's put out in that movie. Okay, and so he went back and he tried to get information on the true logs. He tried to pull all this stuff from that, and he went down the road of explaining why that show is a farce. Okay, and what did he live on? He lived on fast food. He lived on it. His cholesterol levels evened out and got better.
In Fathead.
Yes, the actual guy that put it together, because he did a test on himself.
So what was different about his approach versus the Super Size Me approach? Because I have seen that film.
Well, Super Size Me implies that he ate a certain percentage, which he proved that he could not have eaten. As far as calories in, calories out concept, he said he had to have been eating substantially more than the guy was suggesting that he ate. He kind of, like I said, he kind of proves it. In the same time period, he shows his exact logs. He showed what he ate for real. I mean, and the only thing he said.
That's what I'm saying. So it was just a different amount? It was a lesser amount?
No.
Yes. Different food choices? What was?
Well, no, it wasn't different. It wasn't necessarily different food choices, but it was definitely controlled, because that was the one thing he said he was going to do. He was going to be smart about how he ate.
Yeah, and see, in Super Size Me, he obviously wasn't. He was talking all the time about it was during the Super Size Me period where they were pushing that. So every time that they asked him, "Do you want to supersize that?" he had to say yes. That was his rule.
Right, and the funny thing about that is, even that being the case, as he shows in the show, he could not have, even supersizing it. It would not. Statistically, it didn't make sense.
For what? How much weight he gained?
Yeah, with how it tied in.
So you're saying he cheated it?
I'm saying
he ate more than he documented? What?
Absolutely. I'm definitely saying he ate more than he
documented.
So then, that he showed. I shouldn't say documented. That he showed in his show.
Mm-hmm.
Absolutely. I want to say he supersized like 9 times.
No, I think I don't remember the exact number, but he said that he gave a ratio of how often it happened and how.
Well, and like I said, in this show that I'm talking about, he actually breaks it down.
So
I wish I could actually show that.
I guess my question is, what's your point with the fathead thing?
Well,
you're saying that fast food doesn't contribute to obesity.
I'm saying that fast food is not a cause of obesity.
Really?
Absolutely.
Why do you say that?
Because, like I said, in this show, his weight went down dramatically. His muscle went up.
But
how many? Change. Let me finish this. He didn't change what he was doing. Working out wise, he had a specific. He made sure that was all. He showed it all what he was doing.
Mm-hmm.
So it's not like he went and worked his butt off to make it so he lost weight. But everything, because he was intelligent about how he looked at it. He didn't eat salads. He ate just anything that was on the meal. He would go in there and he wanted to go through and eat pretty much anything that was on the actual menu list. Oh my gosh, my brain is stopping already.
So that's the thing. You've just described all these different factors that he controlled for that this guy didn't. So now, of course, there's going to be a different result, especially if he's exercising. He's exercising awareness with what he's consuming and control, especially portion-wise.
Like I said, he was doing portion control, but it's not like he was avoiding any foods. He wasn't avoiding any foods. He was being smart.
Well, you just said that he was being smart. What do you mean by being smart and selecting specific things on the menu?
He wasn't overeating it. It's not like he went through and killed it, but he wanted to eat. He wanted to make sure he went through the menu. So he was eating everything. He showed, like I said, he showed on the show what he ate.
Yeah,
but
that doesn't necessarily mean that it's not a cause for obesity. It's because the average, from what I've observed, the average person that eats fast food on a consistent enough basis, like someone in Super Size Me, behaves more like someone in Super Size Me than someone in Fathead.
Well, I would disagree with that.
You would?
Absolutely.
Why?
Because, like I said, for one, you haven't seen the show. But,
that's true. I mean, I haven't.
But the reality, like I said, the reality is, being a thinking individual, if you go in and you eat and you're not trying to overeat, because I'm telling you, that's what he was doing in Super Size Me.
Okay.
His intention was to overeat. So he was going because that brings up.
But that's what I'm saying is in Fathead, his intention is to show how he can lose weight while eating fast food, which would be like IIFYM, which we know can work.
Right. Well,
right? Is it the healthiest option? No. And
I
then
agree with that.
You can go and say, I can follow my plate or the food pyramid and do the same thing. I can either gain weight or I can lose weight on it, depending on my focus. If I exercise and I show some forms of control, then of course I can probably lose weight on my plate. And if I don't and I eat to excess, purposefully or unintentionally, I can gain weight on the government recommendations too.
Well, that's fair. And I will say, like I said, we've talked about this a bunch of times, IIFYM. Yours and my issue with that is the nature of what they use it for. So what'll happen is people take it and say, well, I'm within my calories, I'm within this range, blah, blah, blah. I can eat whatever I want as long as I stay in that range. And so what do they choose? They choose the things that are sweet. They choose the things that are going to go down the line of causing, in my opinion, a change in the metabolism, and I think that's what really causes obesity. So, I guess that's what I'm getting at.
So, and I agree with you, but based off what we've just talked about, I mean, pretty much you could say government, fast food, westernization, whatever. Those aren't all causes of obesity. The cause of obesity really is people's either their choice or their ignorance.
Agreed.
I mean, really,
and I agree
because
with that.
they either choose or
totally.
don't know to choose or to not choose things like certain eating habits, types of foods that they eat, certain lifestyle behaviors or lack thereof.
Right. Well, and that's kind of my point.
But contributing factors, I could see how.
Well, the education,
just
side.
like you're saying, the government, the lack of or the pushing of maybe less favorable nutritional approaches to a general populace could contribute to that. That's why I'm saying that's the same argument I'm saying with fast food.
Well, and I'll give you certain aspects of fast food that I have a problem with. And we both know that I do that when I'm on the road a lot. I eat a lot of fast food, and the reality is, I lose weight when I eat fast food almost every single time if I try to. It's not even hard to not lose weight. I can, as long as I'm smart about it, I can lose weight to eating fast food. Like I said, do I think overall fast food is a bad deal? I think it's not the best option. Mm-hmm. You and I both agree on that. I don't think it's the evil. People going out and saying that my son, as an example, old history, gained whatever amount of weight because of McDonald's. That's ridiculous to me. I think it's because you have parents who just didn't do anything about it and let him throw whatever he wanted down his face. Do I think that was only McDonald's? No, I think that's absolutely ridiculous.
What socioeconomic status was this person? If you know, or are you just shouting out kind of a random example?
It is a random example, but I do vaguely remember they were less well off. I don't know where they were exactly, but I would say they were low. They weren't even middle class.
Because if you look at the research, there's a large correlation to individuals who are of lower socioeconomic status with lack of nutrition education and a higher pronality tendency of a trend of obesity.
You're right.
And a lot of that is due to things like food deserts, again, the lack of education, potentially poor school system, so lack of nutrition education in schooling systems.
Sure.
And then you have your modeling and conditioning that's done by your parents at home and things like that. And so individuals who are of lower socioeconomic status may not have access to the resources as much to educate themselves in nutrition, to where should the person be able to sue McDonald's? I don't think so necessarily.
No,
but it might explain why there tends to be more of a trend in obesity or things related to that with that people of that socioeconomic status.
Well, and to bounce to trampoline off what you're saying, I would lean away from McDonald's more towards processed foods. McDonald's.
Oh yeah,
McDonald's is a processed.
Yeah, because that's a whole nother thing.
Absolutely.
Is fast food is a totally different industry. Right. Processed foods is a totally different industry.
Right. No, for sure.
And one thing to think about is I haven't looked too deeply into this. This is more speculative than anything, but I either read somewhere or was talking to somebody about it that are food stamps incentivizing people to buy processed foods?
I don't know the answer to
that. That might be a good thing for us to look into.
We probably should. That's a good question. I don't know that. I don't believe so, but I can't.
I wonder how that works. With is there some fiscal reason why potentially food stamps would incentivize people who are on them or use them to buy processed foods over whole foods? And if that's the case, then that would be a problem.
Oh, for sure.
I don't know if that's the case though.
I would think if that was the case, there were to be an underlying theme, which I'm not suggesting I believe is the case, but that there is manipulations by corporations. It's the only thing that makes sense to me on that. If
like lobbying.
Yeah,
that would make sense.
Which would be legit, but I
is very apparent in like the meat industry and things like that. For sure. But so
which I'm a believer in lobbying to an extent. It really depends on the circumstances behind it, but yeah. Anyway, that's a totally political different thing.
As we're talking about this, it's kind of becoming apparent to me that like I said, it really comes down to people either consciously choose to or not. They make the choice to do so or not, or they don't have the education, so they're ignorant, and that is ultimately the catalyst.
That's part of it.
To
I agree with that.
Not necessarily the full picture,
sure,
but to the development of obesity over time. But obviously, you have these huge influential factors: fast food, processed food, generalized nutritional education being propagated that is not necessarily like if a sedentary, genetically predisposed individual to type 2 diabetes and maybe a higher BMI or something like that, and leading towards obesity, engages in slight excess consumption of processed foods and fast food, or again, government recommended MyPlate, that person's obviously, gonna probably go down that path most likely.
They've got a bigger sign of it. I mean, it's going to lean in that direction. But let's break it down a little bit and go back in and talk about the government's recommendations and why I think, again, it affects, because we didn't talk about it in depth enough. We started to touch on it, then we side noted, and that was probably my fault. But
I think it's all good.
But carbohydrates and sugars, especially directly, have a tendency to make people hungrier and want to eat more food.
They have the least amount of satiety, and they tend, just by consuming them, you actually cause a hunger release,
right,
hormonally speaking, in the body sooner than if you consume proteins or fats.
Exactly right. So the recommendations through like the pyramid and even MyPlate to an extent, it's better, but it still has this concept, leans towards carbohydrates. So what does it cause? Yeah. It causes people to eat more food, okay? And because of that, hormonally they change, and they start leaning towards things like diabetes, and they start leaning towards things that cause fat cells to expand. And so because of that, I think that's the reason why when we started to talk about this on, I wish I could remember the episode, but an episode back a little while ago, that's the reason why I lean towards, like you said, don't get me wrong, I don't blame the government. I don't blame them, because I think they were trying to put out what they thought was correct information.
Yeah, based off of what they had at the time.
Exactly,
and
right.
Again, how we talked about how difficult it is to make those policy changes.
Absolutely.
Even though the guidelines are updated every 5 years, those updates might be small.
They're usually small.
Yeah, except for that recent the food labels getting updated. I think there were some really good positive changes that went
I
along
think that
with
was excellent.
I think
Absolutely.
I still want to see some other changes take place,
sure.
and those won't be fully implemented until 2018. I think is what the deadline is for that. But that was a really good leap forward. I was really proud of the government and whomever was involved with that for making those changes, because it brings awareness to the empty energy density of processed foods, because the way they change the fonts and stuff on the labels, it brings awareness to added sugars, though they didn't put in the total sugar percent daily value, because there isn't one, which there should be.
Right.
But now people are aware of added sugars and things like that, which is, it's going the right direction.
Well, see, and I think the other side of this coin is I really think education needs to change in the way of nutrition for the United States. Worldwide, I think it's a little bit better than the United States is overall, but I don't think I think that with the westernization of the world in their food choices, I think that's causing a massive problem across the globe. See,
there's a lot of evidence to support that mass food production, whether even processed and even GMO and other larger scale food production, is a contributing factor to nutritional, I guess, undernutrition around the world.
Right.
And so a lot of people argue that localizing your food sources, going back to an older model, it would be more substantial,
it'd be healthier,
more healthier, and
there's
could
no way around
contribute.
that.
Could contribute to reversing some of these negative impacts.
And I think so too. There's no way around that. I mean, if you take the reality of, because processing itself, the effect of it on the body is pretty harsh. And so it may make the food last longer, which is great. I mean, it's good. We need to be able to do that.
Processed foods?
Processed foods.
No,
right.
they last less.
Well, if they're out,
they're pre-broken down. They're taken from their original form.
And I get that. I'm saying, but when they're packaged,
shelf life.
Their shelf life.
Yeah.
Longer. Yeah. Once you open,
it's a convenience. Again, we've talked about this. It's a convenience thing.
Right. And again, like I said, I get it. In a lot of the world, if you don't have food, processed food's a lot better than no food.
For sure.
Plainly. But like I said, the United States overall, doing what they thought was the right choice, set a lot of this stuff in motion. And I think, like I said, that's the reason why I go to that trend. You can see how it's gone up since the point that it was really pushed by the government.
Oh, yeah. It's been the last 30 going on 40 years.
Yeah, right. Exactly.
Which ties in right with the end of the 1970s, right when it was being pushed based off at least the information you showed me.
Right. And I mean, I can show you the chart after chart.
Because I wasn't born yet.
Wow.
I'm gonna keep making jabs at your age.
It's all right. Mine's a badge of courage. I lived this long. When you get to this point, you can actually be proud.
It's okay. You can call me naive or something.
No, I won't call you naive. I'll just call you childish. But no, dude, that's like I said. That's why I think that we needed to talk about this, because my personal belief is when guys that are educated in nutrition talk about,
and gals,
people, fair. I stand corrected. Wow. But when they come forward and they start throwing out these statements about how people have to lose weight or gain weight or do these different things, the problem I've got with it is most of this stuff is hormonally controlled. Mm-hmm. Until you get your hormones under control, anything that you want to do on a nutritional level has to be completely changed.
You're right in that thermodynamics is trumped 100% of the... Well, I mean, I say this, but it's based off of what we've looked at. Yeah, it's heavily trumped by hormonal reactions. And plenty of listeners probably know that because they've tried to lose weight before by doing super deficit calories. Then they get into a metabolically damaged state, or at least an emergency stress state. Cortisol increases, different hormonal fluctuations start taking place, and lo and behold, the metabolism masters that, plateaus, and then they start rebounding, coming right back up, despite the fact that they're eating in a deficit.
Yes.
So it's clear that thermodynamics does it play a role? Absolutely. Is it the end all be all? Absolutely not.
Right.
And hormones trump it.
Well, and again, I mean, what does it come down to? If you can get yourself in a stable position, you can control it by counting. Mm-hmm. And that's why when we talked about counting calories before, I kept saying, in fairness, can people do it? Yes. Mm-hmm. The problem is
the circumstances have to be right.
The circumstances have to be almost exacting to be able to make it work right. Because if it's not, it fluctuates so dramatically, and if the hormones go out of balance at all, it completely negates it all. And that's the reason why I think when people when they're looking at a nutritional idea, they need to take into consideration more the hormone reaction and what it does to their body. You know, an example of this, and again, I don't want to demonize any food, but I'm gonna just kind of step on it for 2 seconds. Because I feel it's looked at in a weird light for me, but it's soy. Okay,
Yeah.
What soy does on a hormonal level, especially to men, completely messes with their hormones
in large doses. Yeah,
right. And so using it as a substitute is something that will cause an issue. Okay, experts, and again, I'm not calling them pseudo experts. People that are actually pretty knowledgeable in this field will look at it and say, you know, choose this over this. And the problem is they're not looking at it on a hormonal level. They're looking at a macronutrient, or they're looking at it on a caloric level, and that's a problem. And I think part of that is one of the reasons why we have problems with obesity in this nation. You know, in the world.
I think that you're 100% right. You know, we're I'm on a similar page as you are when it comes to this. It's once the information has been revealed and has shown consistency, and it's, you know, legitimate science and good methods and things like that, and again, it's tracked over a long enough period of time, that's when that information starts being implemented.
Right.
And so I think we're just in this phase where we're learning more about how big of a role hormones play in the regulation of your metabolism and your overall body composition.
Right.
And I think in a couple decades, I bet we'll start to see some shifting on a
I think you're already
on a national or a global level towards maybe more accurate recommendations, because you said the government did probably the best that they could with the experts they had, with the education they had, but those experts were probably of a certain age that had schooling a certain number of years ago.
They had an agenda.
Well, I mean, yeah, right? Like,
the ones we're speaking of, we know had an agenda. Why they had an agenda, we don't know, but they had an idea, and I think they were trying to be good too. Don't get me wrong. I don't want to say that any of these guys were demons in this. I think that they had an agenda and they wanted to prove a point, and they were wrong on their point, and they forced a point that was completely detrimental to society. You know, and I really believe that a large chunk of the obesity problem in the United States and the world currently stems off of a lot of stuff that happened in the 1950s. If things had been different, we wouldn't have the issues. If you go before it, a lot of those issues didn't exist, and they were created because of the change. You know, if you want to say causation, that whole concept, I agree, this rolls with it, and it doesn't necessarily mean that it is it. But correlation, right? And the problem is this is so tightly bound to the same line of when that timeline went, that it's hard not to say that it was part of it.
No, I don't think that we say it isn't. I think it definitely was. There's just so many moving parts when it comes to contributing factors to obesity.
Agreed.
That we can't. There's no one single cause. You know, until it really comes down to a shift in lifestyle choices, again, whether conscious or unconscious in the individual.
Right.
And then, I mean, there's all these external factors that influence that shift the way that people start making choices, and what they end up starting to do in terms of lifestyle, and what they start to do in terms of what they choose to eat. And economic changes obviously influence that too, because now it's like this new science figures out that we can mass produce and extend shelf life of foods. Well, now it's just, and we put them in convenient little packages for you, and now you can spend your time doing something else, or working harder, or you don't have to grocery shop anymore, because, or just, there's so many moving parts and pieces that have contributed to this, that have caused that shift. We have to start identifying ways to intervene and get that shift to move, which we might be
financial.
True, but we might be in the middle of that, at least with like we said, the trend of type 2 diabetes leveling off. Even the reason why is because the people who are in that stage are starting to become more educated, and are starting to themselves tweak it themselves. So you watch that trend itself is starting to shall we say roll the corner, because of the people that are involved in it. But let's take food as an example. Okay, so in the world of processed food, what do you think is a causation, if you will, to them being a problem?
what makes them
processed foods?
Yes,
being a contributing problem. Well,
sure. What is it that makes them different than
a lot?
whole foods?
The denaturization of the micronutritional value of the food through the process, the additives that are chemically based, that even though in trace amounts might not be viewed as dangerous, consumed on a chronic level over a long period of time can become toxic.
Sure.
We know there's carcinogens that are put into food, like artificial sweeteners. Again, just consumed over a long period of time can be a contributing factor. There might be an association between those and cancers. I can't remember if I brought this up outside of an episode or in an episode. The world, but especially the United States, is in this paradox, which is we are the most abundantly fed and the most undernourished we've ever been.
Right. I was going to bring that up too, actually.
And so what it shows is there's not a lack of energy. There's a lack of nutritional value.
And I you're right.
And that's very apparent in processed foods. And there's some decent processed foods.
Well,
you know what I mean? That are not that big of a deal. It's not like all processed foods need to be stopped.
I want to dispute you for 2 seconds, but it's not because I disagree with you. I want to dispute you on one reason. I think it's because of money. I think the majority of the problem with processed food,
well, again, that's a factor. It's
the big factor, because when you start talking, and I'm not going to use company names, but you talk to these big companies that are putting these out there.
Yeah, please don't mention.
No,
companies right now.
well, and it's not because I'd be incorrect, and so I'm not worried about any
Well, we should just do our due diligence before we name.
And again, I don't want to name them, because I'm not trying. Like I said, I'm not trying to demonize them. They're doing good work in the idea that they're getting food out to the populace. And that's something that's good.
I mean, despite the fact that maybe one of their motives is profits,
which is
you know what I mean?
We've talked about this
there
before.
Is still good that I mean,
profit isn't a bad thing.
Yeah, but when it comes down to, okay, and I don't know what kind of like programs companies or charities companies are involved with feeding people and things like that, but I'm sure it's out there. I haven't really looked that deeply into it. But when you talk about, okay, GMOs can extend the shelf life of food, and even GMOs will even extend the shelf life of produce too.
Sure.
They can make them bigger, have more energy density. That they get packaged in a way that allows them to last longer. You can now ship these foods. Of course, absolutely. In terms of feeding the world, it's better to give somebody something that's going to sustain their life versus not, because it's not of the greatest quality. I mean, it's just a problem that eventually we're going to have to figure out another solution to.
No, right.
Because they're going to be, like I said, have abundance of energy,
right,
but not an abundance of nutritional value,
right, and
then that's what's going to still contribute to obesity growth.
Well, and let's follow the nature of the way the government pushing certain things when they were going down their nutrition lines caused that to change. So there's a book called Salt, Sugar, and Fat.
I've heard of it. I haven't read it.
Salt, Sugar, Fat. There's not an and, but it's by Michael Moss. Okay, and I have gone through that book. It's a really good book. It talks kind of the history of the nutritional world and how businesses changed to go along that line. Mm-hmm. So as things were demonized, because that's the reason why
businesses capitalized on it.
Business not only capitalized on it, but they twisted it because of the idea that okay, well, this is the plan of the United States. This is what we're going for. The populace is starting to look for this, so we're going to change. Instead of doing fats, we'll put sugars in. Mm-hmm. Instead of putting sugars, we'll put salts in. And they basically rotate between those three because
those are the most palatable
exactly
aspects of food.
Exactly. So what happens? So to hit the sweet spot, they start using certain amounts of sugars. Mm-hmm. They use certain amounts of salts.
They've definitely done R&D on that,
which is amazingly cool as far as on a scientific study. I think that is cool, but that, in my opinion, is another portion of the reason why we have massive problems with obesity.
Yeah.
Because what happens, they use a lot of sugars to a certain point so that people want to eat it. And once they want to eat it, they get a taste for it, which causes them to be hungrier because it's a carbohydrate that causes more hunger, in their reactions. And so next thing you know, they're eating more and more and more and more.
Well, that's why you have people that are either diagnosed or self-proclaimed addicts of certain foods.
Sure.
Especially sugar, because it has been dialed down to a science of how to get someone to desire at least their food, if not, whether it was intentional or not, become addicted.
Right.
Figure out the most optimal palatable taste for specific foods.
Right.
And obviously that increases revenue, that increases
For sure.
sales. So I mean, and you're right on that, and I agree with you completely. But in terms of, it is definitely a contributing factor to obesity for sure, in my opinion. But if people understand that and then say, okay, well, that shouldn't happen, now we're into a political issue of free market regulation.
Of course.
And so
you're right on that.
That's where it becomes an issue, is where do you stand with that? And I'm not necessarily asking you unless you want to give your insight to that, but where do people stand with that? And because you have dramatic economic implications as a result of that.
Oh, of course.
And that's why you have the lobbying too, because it aids in the whole process and the whole increasing of profits.
Sure. And that's the reason why I think a lot of obesity issues stems from a profit margin. And do I think that companies are out there with the intention of trying to make somebody heavy? No, because they want somebody to live longer. They're not.
Yeah, because if they die, they lose a consumer and they lose money.
Exactly right.
So that's why that's why you're seeing people like General Mills. I will say this name because it's a positive thing. General Mills has started taking, I believe it's them, has started taking out most, I think, artificial ingredients, including things like colors. I'm not sure about sweeteners, but I think they're going more towards like a more natural sweetener. Like sugar is going to still be sugar, but there's certain components of sweeteners that are worse than others.
Right.
But they're starting to change their cereals to be more of what they can see what the market is shifting towards.
And I think
that's a great change.
Which is a good change. And I'm not going to, again, I don't think profits are a bad thing. I mean, me saying this almost makes it sound like I'm demonizing it, but I think that goes with the trends of the society. And so because the world itself, especially again the United States, we are so much becoming more focused on the idea of rounding that corner and becoming more healthy and trying to be better about what we're doing. And people are struggling with it so much that they're starting to actually grasp onto these things and move forward with them. And right now the market is starting to swing in that direction. Okay, I want to say Kraft Food was the first one to actually start putting information on the front of the box instead of just on the back of the box, so that people could see it instantly.
Good information, or
good information, like
obviously
sugars,
would be good.
Things like that,
0 sugars or 25% less sugar or something like that.
And they started to represent. I can't remember how it reads out exactly. I wish I could. I think it's in that book. As a matter of fact, it's when I actually found out about it myself. But if you start looking at the box and you start noticing that kind of stuff, I think that's awesome. I think that's a move that we need to have happen. And it's something that I think will drive the market if we as consumers actually pay attention to it.
Yeah, in my opinion, the focus needs to be put towards mass production of adequate educational materials.
Yes, and that's my biggest point. That's my biggest point.
And that's the same argument when it comes to supplementation. Do I think the supplement industry should be regulated further? Not necessarily.
No, I think
I think that there needs to be adequate amounts of information provided. So in terms of, should a new regulation be in place, be placed requiring specific educational materials about foods and supplements? I think that would be a great move. But I mean because it's going to be more impactful, in my opinion, if we approach it from getting people to understand what is healthy and determine for themselves what they want based off of real solid information about these products, that will cause a market shift, which will force the companies to change in a healthier direction anyway. Right. Just like we're seeing with, like I said, the General Mills thing.
Again, that's what I'm suggesting. My thought process is, should we have more regulations when it comes to supplements? No. I think supplementation regulation is absolutely ludicrous. But that being said, okay, you can almost call it a regulation that there's an education.
That's what it would be, because it would, some entity, which we don't have one other than the government, would have to require them to provide. Okay, you have to provide a PDF download with every supplement purchase or a printout with every shipped order of the research that you're citing that supports the claims of this supplement, the good manufacturing practices associated with it.
You're right.
It would have to be a regulation.
You're right.
But it would be a small one, obviously.
It would be substantially less than what most regulations are when it comes to
should supplements be regulated like prescription drugs? I don't think so. Absolutely
not at all. But see, again, even on that side, okay, so let's take drugs. Do I believe that there are good and bad drugs? Absolutely. Do I think that people should be able to take any drug that they want? Questionably. And do I believe that people should take specific drugs? Absolutely not. That being said, as long as it's not hurting anybody else, I personally don't have an issue with it. Okay. Do I believe that marijuana is something that should be legal across the United States? I honestly don't. That being said, as long as it's not being smoked around me, because I don't believe it should be smoked, that's not my problem. Okay. Mm-hmm. As long as it's not causing an impact on my life directly, to me, it's not an issue. You know, we've talked briefly about things like steroids. We've talked, about what should we call them? Not sports.
Performance enhancing
drugs.
PEDs or ergogenic aids.
Yeah, let's talk
about... Because ergogenic aids would be like more supplemental, and PEDs would be drugs.
Right, they'd be pharmaceuticals. So do I think that those kind of things should be regulated? They should be somewhat controlled, because like I said, we've talked about this off of mic many times. I think that someone over the age of 21 should have the capacity to take them if they want to. Under the age of 21, they do such a dramatic effect to a person. I think that they should be controlled to a large extent, because it will do an effect on someone who's not even classified as an adult technically. Mm-hmm. Does that make sense? And I think that kind of thing should be regulated. Do I think that they should be regulated beyond that? To an extent, just for educational purposes, because I don't think someone should jump in and take something that was classified as a pro-hormone before, or SARM, or or steroidal, without education. To tie this back in, I feel the same way to an extent about foods. It's not that someone shouldn't be able to eat something. I mean, that's ridiculous. But I think the education should be more freely accessible. And I think that as things are put out there, they may not change their stance. They should drop these studies out there in such a way that even if they televise it, I really think that there should almost be a commercial level where people that are watching television can understand what the foods are doing.
I can't remember what the statistic is. I think it's, and I'm probably wrong, but I think it's something like 1 in 6 commercials is actually a healthy commercial for Whole Foods. But the problem is funding. It all revolves around money.
I agree with that. That's
and the same thing. My first approach, besides that would be probably a way easier to implement type of intervention, but revamping how we approach public schooling. We are known for having poor public schooling globally, and
that's true.
And why not start with the next generation who are going to see the generation that has the highest rates of childhood obesity and type 2 diabetes or pre-diabetes, at least that's starting. Start with the people, the group of people that it's going to impact the most. And just start revamping our schooling system and to implement the importance of physical education and nutrition education, real nutrition education. One simple class where you cook, you know what I mean, and use not as healthy food items is not substantial.
No,
my nutrition education growing up was almost non-existent in the public schooling system. And physical education, as we know, has been cut before out of many programs, and people are now starting to realize that's a contributing factor to obesity. And private schools I've seen, and public schools whose administration and teachers value the health of their children, have started taking steps towards initiatives, fundraising, and developing programs that are oriented around real nutrition education and real physical activity, incorporating both aerobic and resistance training and just general activity promotion. And that's in my opinion, that's going to be the ticket. If we can get on a national level in both areas of higher and lower socioeconomic status on the same level of nutrition and probably incorporating supplement education too now with how big of an industry that is, but going towards at least physical activity and nutrition programs that are substantial. There's plenty of research coming out now about those types of programs that are showing increases in test scores, focus during class.
Oh, for sure.
Obviously, there's going to be benefits, as we know from the science associated with fitness and health.
It can't help but.
So that's where, I mean, is that a bigger project to tackle? Absolutely. But I think that's going to be, if we can, as a society, get that, make that shift, that's what's going to be one of the most impacting factors. But until then, more rapid means of education needs to be approached.
Well, and I think more intelligence on the side of the consumer. Again, I've pointed this out multiple times that I feel the educational aspects are on the shoulder of the consumer, and
yeah, I agree.
And part of why I wanted to talk about this is I think we need to inform those that listen to us anyway that
ultimately that's why we're doing this.
Exactly.
Because I mean, here's the thing: is I didn't realize when you live life from a certain perspective, it's hard sometimes to look from other people's perspective.
For sure.
It's easy to say, "Hey, you should just know better," or you should know to be skeptical, or you should know to self-educate.
Right.
Sometimes that's a luxury of a certain level of socioeconomic status.
A true fact.
You know what I mean? And that's where there's a whole group of people that you could argue suffer from a lack of resources. That it's easy for us to say that, and it's easy because we can, we have resources, we have a means of broadcasting this to. We're being listened to in almost 20 countries now.
Right.
But that's not something that everybody has.
Right. No, that's absolutely true.
We have access to.
No, we've gotten a larger voice because of that, which I think is awesome. But an example of what I'm talking about is Jamie Oliver.
Oh yeah, I love his stuff.
Yeah, he
focuses on changing school programs specifically, right?
Well, multiple. He's gone to cities, towns.
The majority of the videos I've seen of his he does a lot of stuff tied to nutrition related to like an elementary level education.
There's truth to that. He's done a lot of stuff related to trying to get towns to change their eating styles, and I felt kind of saddened by the fact that he didn't get a large enough viewing point to continue the experiment. But it was showing signs of improvement.
What was the experiment?
He was going into a specific city. I'm trying to remember what it was. And he went into this city. It was a town, and it was like one of the heavier towns in the United States. Mm-hmm. And he went in and he started to help these people understand how their eating really affected their lives. And
wasn't that the smoothie guy? The
guy that did the
Joe Cross? Is that his name?
Oh, you got me confused.
I don't know. He's I'm not sure his real nutritional background, but he did the something scared to death, like naked. What is it?
Well,
I can't remember. It's something like.
Okay, yeah, he did 2 shows.
Yeah, the guy, because wasn't it that guy? And he went in.
He's a juicer.
Which we've talked about, but
no. He actually is a big believer in juicing. In fact, he had gone really heavy over.
Well, he rebounded hard. That's why he did the second film. Did you see that?
Yes, absolutely. I watched
because
I watched
all the fiber out of everything.
Yeah, I watched both of them, and he went back and started doing the same thing. But he had there was a truck driver that actually they followed in the United States that had a very similar bouncing back and forth. But see, when they stop, it was instantaneous. They went right back to where they were because their nutrition's not good. Mm-hmm. I don't hate the guy. I think his shows are pretty slick. There was
I watched them, and I think anything that is even still a slightly that has good intentions and has good outcomes, or better outcomes, even though it might not be the best outcome or the best approach, is still something that's it's bringing awareness, and it's something that's going to help towards the shift, even though I have, like I said, when it would come down to the exact details of their approach, we might nitpick. But
well, of course, his shows were Fat, Sick, and Nearly Dead.
Fat, Sick, and Nearly Dead.
But yeah, he
I was thinking like Naked and Afraid.
No, he's an interesting guy. He's from Australia, actually.
Yeah. Well, Jamie Oliver's from there, or New Zealand, right?
No, I think Jamie Oliver's from England.
Oh, okay.
But yeah, like I said, dude, I think that what the biggest problem is it's based on a poor education. It's based on being put out there unknowingly, affecting. And this is the reason why I want to have this conversation. And it is affecting the world populace in such a negative light that if we don't ourselves start to rebound on our own and fixing this stuff, because the government is slowly but surely, like we talked about, they're slowly but surely changing.
But there's so many hoops and red tape to jump through.
That causes a problem.
That's where I think you and I agree that if we get it changed on a mass educational level,
yes,
the market will cause the shift, because at least in the United States, the people control. They control more than they think, because a lot of people blame big corporations, blah blah blah, and maybe there's arguments to be made there, but the real truth of it is, if the entire marketplace makes a conscious shift, it changes the whole economic approach to it. And we have that power,
absolutely,
but it has to happen on a mass level, with the populace.
It has to happen with the populace.
So
it can't happen as a person.
What has to happen is people have to truly start valuing their health enough,
for sure,
that this demand for education is sought after from the mass populace. And the problem is that shift hasn't fully happened, and more awareness needs to be brought about.
Absolutely. So I want to not give solutions, but I want to give some really quick recommendations. Then I want to cut this because I don't want to go way too far. But the reason why I've talked and you've talked about, and you've experimented with it, I've experimented with it to an extent, but ketogenic diets is because it changes on a hormonal level, and it makes it so your body starts to break things down in a better way. It breaks you out of the cycle faster. I think if you go low carb and you start to manipulate how your hormones react because of that change, you will actually have a much better effect. The problem is the rebound effect. If they jump right back into carbohydrates, which I'm not saying they shouldn't go back to carbs, I'm saying if they do it too fast and they don't reverse diet, if you will, into carbs, that'll be a problem. But I think that
I don't think so, because it depends on how long they do it, because their insulin sensitivity will already have increased.
It will have increased,
but it's more on a habitual level and psychological factors.
And that's
I
what
think
I'm saying.
Would influence that.
Right, and what's going to happen is their body will want to go back to the same reactions once they start to realize it can, and that's where you start to have that rebound. That's why I think you need to reverse diet out of it. Mm-hmm. Does that make sense? I think that if you do that kind of stuff, it's going to set it up so your hormones start getting back in gear. And I think that going ketogenic is a really harsh way to do it. I think low carb's not too bad.
I was going to say it's the other end of the spectrum.
Yes.
It's not necessarily a bad thing, but it is extreme.
Yes.
And as we've talked, it's very difficult to maintain, as we both have experienced.
Well, and I liked it more because that's more my style of eating, but that's because I lean towards it anyway.
If you look on it at that spectrum, and let's there's other factors, but let's just say for the sake of the argument there isn't, right? Mm-hmm. You got high carb, high sugar intake, and then you have basically none, high fat, very low carb ketogenic approach.
Sure.
Well, what is that spectrum? That is a metabolic flexibility spectrum.
Oh, of course. So we've talked about that. That's the reason why I say that should be our base nutrition.
But what I want to do is reinforce your argument, not take away from it. And what I mean is that, does a person have to do ketogenic to reverse this? No. They need to exercise moderation.
Yes.
Enough to the point where they can establish metabolic flexibility.
Right, for sure.
Understanding that generally fats and carbohydrates are your primary fuel sources, and proteins are used to repair. Very rare instances are those used for energy. So if you can balance your tolerance, balance the tolerance and intake of your fats and your carbohydrates in moderation with a whole food approach, good diet, you can be either ketogenic or not ever, but moderating those carbohydrate levels to where you can start to teach your body to be more insulin sensitive, to be more glucose sensitive, to be able to recruit body fat and decrease weight and BMI. Yes. But that's the thing, is the education on that has to get out there.
Absolutely. And that's the reason why I think with the majority of the way the Western diet is, instead of what we're talking about, if you've been eating that style, going more low carb is going to make it so you'll have a more rapid hormonal change.
Yeah.
And I think, and not that rapid is necessarily a good or bad thing, but that's the reason why I wanted to share that in this. Is I
would lean towards saying it should probably be more gradual,
for sure,
because gradual change elicits better adherence long term.
Absolutely, and it's a better effect. Yeah. And so me saying this, I'm not siding with the IIFYM. But I'm going to say, if you used IIFYM correctly, this is kind of the concept that we're talking about, and it's going to move you in the direction. But I think overall, like I said, I think that is a poor way to eat overall, because it tends to push people in the wrong direction. That's the reason why I don't like that diet plan, the concept of that diet plan. But if it's used correctly, I think it's a beautiful way to go.
If it's used from the approach of a metabolic flexibility, still focusing on eating well and not using it as a justification for poor eating habits, like it often is, then it's totally fine. I think in its nature, it's a perfectly great approach, but it in the wrong hands, I guess you could say, in people who don't want, in people who are wanting to make a change, they'll use it correctly. And people who are wanting to justify poor eating.
Potentially. The problem is the way it's done online.
But that's what I'm saying is
because they're uneducated. They're uneducated, and this is the issue I have with it.
Oh, I see what you mean.
They're uneducated.
They think
in what
that
they're
because
doing.
they're doing it, they're going to be healthy.
Right. They see someone who does a pizza diet. They see someone who does an ice cream diet. They see someone who does a Twinkie diet, which is a Twinkie diet for sure is a real deal. I know the pizza diet was done. I'm not sure about an ice cream diet.
There's like dude, I'm not even kidding. There's a something, the taco diet, I think is just what it's called. It's like, and are tacos bad? Not necessarily.
No,
but like you can't just live off tacos.
But like I said, dude, that's the whole,
because it fits your macros.
The whole point is that breeds poor education. So people that are really striving to do this right, that's where the problem lies with that specific category. And so that's why I want to, like I said, I want to say that can be used correctly. If someone takes it and studies it out and does it the right way, it is a phenomenally good idea. The problem is in the implementation of it, not necessarily in that itself. So, like I said, for me, if I was going to recommend for somebody to do this, I would probably go low carb. I'd be smart about it. I would go slow into it. I would use low carb to get you into an intermittent fasting concept, because that's going to help too, because that changes your hormones in a very rapid way. And so it'll help with those things. But if you don't do it smart and gradual, both directions, in and out of it, you're going to end up having the same kind of reactions and go right back to where you were at.
Yeah.
But I don't know. Is it any more you wanted to talk about on
just
this?
I think we should just wrap it up for people, so that basically this is
I think we've come to the end
causes and aspects of obesity. Causes, contributing factors, there's probably hundreds or thousands of them, but
for sure,
you have things like lack of education, socioeconomic status. There's genetic factors. There's ethnic factors. There are things like economic factors.
Sure.
The different food industries, processed food, fast food, the meat industry. You have other physiological factors like insulin resistance, genetics. Obviously, we talked about overeating, high carbohydrate focus to the point of excess. Eating frequency, unconscious eating, physical inactivity, the list goes on and on. These are all contributing factors to obesity.
Right.
But when you narrow it down, our first recommended solution is going to be, there needs to be more education. And
absolutely.
It's one of the main motivations for this podcast.
Yes.
So yeah, I think that gives people a really good idea on some of the history, some of the trends of obesity, and causes, and all the factors that influence it.
Well, now at this point, I want to change gears for two blinks, and then we'll call it
two blinks.
So my thought process is, for the general populace out there that's listening to us, pull your friends into listening to our podcast. Throw questions out about this specifically, because we want to cover this in more depth and across the board. Granted, I think we've done pretty good in this podcast, but if you have questions about this, if you need more explanations in this, if we've gone too far with it, we want to hear your guys' input. Throw 5-star ratings on us for iTunes. That kind of stuff's going to help us out. So
honestly, yeah, if you see value in this podcast, let us know what you want more of, because we can sit here and tell you what we think you should know, but ultimately it'll also come down to what do you want from this? What do you want out of us? And if you truly value it, and you think that this is a good message, and you think that other people, friends, family, coworkers that suffer from health-related issues, different conditions, or they just want to get in better shape and they don't know how, share this with them. And when you give us a 5-star rating and review on iTunes, it helps rank us so that more people can see us, can gain this free information.
Right. It makes it a higher visible thing. Even if you don't appreciate where we're going with this podcast, we want to hear from you guys too, because the honest truth is that's going to make us grow and get better, and that's what we're looking for.
We want to know how to help.
Right. And we don't know where our inadequacies are, because like I've always said, if you're playing chess, you can't see the moves as easily as if you're watching somebody play chess. So you guys can help us
play chess
with your information. So
cool. Well, there you have it, guys and gals. There's some information on obesity, and yeah.
Yep.
Till next time.
You're awesome.
We'll talk to you soon. Hey everybody, thank you so much for tuning in to today's episode. Shane and I hope you learned something new and exciting today about your own health and fitness. Head over to metabolicradio.com. There you'll find our bios and our results-driven programs that are designed to help teach you everything you need to know when it comes to getting real permanent results. You can also sign up for our newsletter to get free weekly updates. To chat with Shane or I, just email us at taylor@metabolicradio.com or shane@metabolicradio.com. We would love to hear from you. You can also join the conversation on Facebook. Just go to facebook.com and search for Metabolic Radio Private Forum. There you can request to join the group. We would love to add you to the conversation and answer your questions on the show. And hey, if you like our podcast, please help us grow our community by leaving us a 5-star rating and review on iTunes. We would really appreciate your help. Thanks again so much for all your support and your listenership. Now go out there and spread the good word of fitness.